All right, let's jump into this deep dive into a pretty pivotal era in Roman history. We're talking Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius. And for all you military history buffs out there, this one's going to be really fascinating because we're not just going to be talking about like palace intrigue and stuff. We're going to be exploring how these emperors' conflicts and decisions really shape the battlefield and ultimately the map of Europe.
Yeah, for sure. I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that their reigns were inextricably linked to the military machine, right? That was the Roman army. Their ambitions, their failures, their successes on the battlefield, I mean, these had repercussions that echoed for centuries.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's unpack this a bit. Let's start with Tiberius. So history kind of remembers him as like a kind of dour figure,
Yeah.
right? But I think what we often overlook is how his policies really impacted the Roman legions. He had this reputation for frugality.
Hmm.
How did that play out in a military context?
Yeah, I mean, so imagine you're a Roman soldier and you're used to the lavish spending of the Augustan era. And then suddenly, under Tiberius, like the purse strings are tightened. So you're seeing fewer games, less grand public works. And of course, the army felt this too. Tiberius really prioritized maintaining existing borders over like this aggressive expansion.
Makes sense. Austerity measures probably meant fewer resources for big campaigns, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, fewer new recruits, less funding for equipment and fortifications. This had a twofold effect. So on one hand, it meant that the legions, they were mostly focused on defense. They were solidifying the existing conquests. But on the other hand, it meant that the soldiers who were so accustomed to the spoils of war, they might have become disillusioned.
It's interesting. So even though Tiberius wasn't actively losing battles, his approach to military spending might have actually like had a ripple effect on morale, right?
Right.
And just the overall readiness of the legions.
Exactly. And this is where the whole controversy surrounding Germanicus comes into play.
Right, Germanicus.
Yeah, Germanicus. I mean, he was a super popular general, known for his victories in Germania. I mean, he represented that more expansionist, glorious, military tradition that the Romans had come to expect.
Right. And Tiberius, maybe out of suspicion or simply due to his different priorities, seemed to kind of clash with
Oh,
Germanicus.
for sure. There was definitely tension. Some historians believe that Tiberius was wary of Germanicus's, popularity, and maybe he saw him as a potential rival. And remember, succession in the Roman Empire was almost never smooth. So when Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances in 19 AD, a lot of Romans, they suspected foul play, right? They thought Tiberius might be involved.
Yeah, that's got to be a blow to morale, right? Losing a beloved general under a cloud of suspicion like that. How did the legions react?
Oh, it definitely fueled resentment. There's no doubt about
Hmm.
that. But Tiberius, despite, maybe any internal conflicts, he was still a shrewd strategist. So he consolidated power, he strengthened the border defenses, and he maintained like a relative peace. I mean, this period of stability, however uneasy, it was really crucial in setting the stage for later emperors to embark on like bolder military ventures.
Yeah, almost like Tiberius. Through his fiscal and military caution, he was inadvertently kind of laying the groundwork for a more expansionist period, right?
Right.
A period that would follow. His successor, Caligula, couldn't have been more different, though.
Oh, absolutely. Caligula, at least initially, presented himself as a stark contrast to Tiberius. I mean, he was young, he was charismatic, he was eager to kind of prove himself on the battlefield.
Okay, so let's dive into Caligula then.
Hmm.
So he's obviously known for his erratic behavior and all that, but what was his actual military record like? Did he live up to those, early promises?
It's a mixed bag. I mean, he launched several campaigns, most notably, I guess, the invasion of Britain in 40 AD. But, unlike Claudius's later successful conquest, Caligula's attempt, it was more about spectacle than, strategic gain.
That sounds like Caligula, all flash, no substance.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, imagine this, right? So Caligula, he marches his legions all the way to the shores of Gaul, across from Britain, right? But then instead of launching a full-scale invasion, he orders his soldiers to collect seashells. And he declares them spoils of war against the god Neptune.
You kidding? Seashells. That's unbelievable. What were his generals thinking? What was the point of this bizarre, charade?
I mean, who knows? It's hard to say for sure. Some historians believe that it was a PR stunt, a way to create an illusion of military victory without the risk of actual combat, right? Others see it as just a sign of Caligula's, increasing instability and just disconnect from reality.
Yeah. Whatever the reason, though, it really highlights how an emperor's personal eccentricities, they can really directly impact military strategy, right?
Yeah.
This victory over Neptune, it certainly didn't win Caligula any favors with the legion.
No, not at all. I mean, the legions, they craved real victories, tangible gains, and Caligula's actions most likely fueled, their growing dissatisfaction. And this, coupled with his increasingly tyrannical behavior, it ultimately led to his assassination, of course, in 41 AD.
And with Caligula out of the picture, the stage was set for, well, the most unlikely emperor of them all.
Right.
Right, Claudius. I mean, from seashells as trophies to the conquest of Britain, talk about a swing of the pendulum.
I mean, you got to admit, right, Claudius's rise to the throne was anything but conventional. Remember, he was actually considered physically unfit for leadership, more like scholar than soldier. Yet he ended up overseeing one of Rome's most significant military triumphs, the conquest of Britain.
It's hard to imagine the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite force, choosing someone who didn't exactly fit the image of a warrior king. So what led them to Claudius?
Well, I think they needed someone they could control, someone who owed them his position, right? And Claudius, at least at first glance, seemed like the perfect puppet. But they underestimated, I think, both his political cunning and, more importantly, I think, his understanding of the military.
So Claudius, despite his lack of battlefield experience,
Yeah.
he grasped the strategic importance of the legions.
Absolutely. He knew that a strong military, it wasn't just essential for expanding the empire, but also for maintaining his own authority. I mean, he needed to win over the legions, prove himself as a capable commander-in-chief, and the invasion of Britain, well, I mean, that provided that perfect opportunity.
Yeah, it was a risky move, though, right? I mean, Julius Caesar, he had attempted an invasion, decades earlier?
Yeah.
And failed. So what made Claudius think he could succeed where Caesar had stumbled?
Well, there were, I think, a few key factors at play. First, Claudius's preparation. It was meticulous, right? So he assembled this formidable force around 40,000 men, including legions, auxiliary troops, and even, get this, war elephants.
War elephants and Britain.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been a sight to behold. But beyond the spectacle,
Yeah.
right, what else set Claudius's invasion apart from Caesar's?
Well, Claudius had a clear strategic objective. It was the establishment of a permanent Roman province in Britain. So this wasn't just a raid for glory. This was a calculated move to expand Roman control and exploit Britain's resources.
So logistics and long-term vision, a far cry from Caligula, collecting seashells on a beach. So how did the campaign actually unfold? Were there any key battles that really stand out?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There were several, decisive engagements, each highlighting Roman military prowess. The Battle of the Medway was crucial. I mean, the British tribes, led by Germanicus, they put up fierce resistance. But the Roman legions, with their superior discipline and tactics, they were ultimately victorious.
I was thinking for our listeners who might not be super familiar with Roman military tactics, what gave them such an edge on the battlefield? What were some of their go-to moves?
So imagine you're facing a Roman legion. They're not like a disorganized horde. They're this highly disciplined fighting force. Think formations like the testudo, where soldiers interlock their shields, creating this moving fortress, right? Or the pilum, a heavy javelin that was designed to pierce enemy shields and disrupt their formations.
So a mix of defensive and offensive tactics, all executed with precision. No wonder they were so formidable. But I imagine the Britons weren't just pushovers, right? They had their own strategies and advantages too, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. The Britons, they were skilled warriors, especially in guerrilla warfare.
Oh.
They knew the terrain. They could disappear into the forest and launch these surprise attacks. This made the conquest a much more protracted and challenging affair than Claudius might have anticipated.
So even with superior tactics and technology, the Romans still faced stiff resistance, huh? It wasn't an easy victory.
Not at all. It took years of hard fighting, multiple campaigns, and even a few setbacks before the Romans finally consolidated their control over, southern Britain.
And speaking of setbacks, what about Boudica? I mean, her rebellion a few years later, that was a major challenge to Roman rule, right?
Yeah. Boudica's rebellion in 60 AD, it was really a testament to the enduring spirit of resistance among the native Britons. She united various tribes and inflicted heavy losses on the Romans. I mean, they even sacked the city of Londinium, which would later become London.
Wow, that must have been a wake-up call for the Romans, right? They had established their presence, but clearly hadn't, won over the hearts and minds of the conquered population.
Exactly, yeah. Boudica's rebellion, it highlighted the the ongoing challenges of Roman occupation, it really underscored the need for not just military might, but also like a more nuanced approach to governance, one that actually addressed the grievances of the local population.
So Claudius's invasion of Britain, while ultimately successful, was really just the beginning, right, of a long and complex story of Roman rule in Britain. And it had far-reaching consequences, shaping the cultural and political landscape of the island for centuries.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that even in these seemingly decisive military victories, the true impact often unfolds over generations. The clash of cultures, the exchange of ideas, the lasting imprint of Roman institutions, all of these factors stemmed from Claudius's bold decision to cross the English Channel.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit here and talk about the other legacy of Claudius's reign, his rather complicated personal life. I mean, his marriages, especially to Messalina and Agrippina the Younger, they were, well, pretty notorious, even by Roman standards. So how did these relationships affect his rule, especially in a military context?
Yeah, Claudius's personal life was definitely a tangled web, and it's impossible to completely separate it from his political and military decisions. Messalina, for example, with her alleged scandals and intrigues, she might have undermined his authority, creating distractions, sowing seeds of discontent within the court.
Imagine trying to manage legions, plan campaigns, deal with a rebellious province, and then you have to go home and deal with all this palace drama. It must have been exhausting.
To say the least, yeah. And then there's Agrippina the Younger, Claudius's fourth wife. She was even more ambitious and cunning than Messalina. Her influence over Claudius was significant, and some historians believe she actually played a role in pushing for the invasion of Britain.
Interesting. So Agrippina might have had her own reasons for wanting to see the legions conquer Britain. What were her motivations?
Well, remember, Agrippina's ultimate goal was to secure power for her son, Nero. A successful military campaign, like the conquest of Britain, would have bolstered Claudius's prestige, right? And that would, in turn, strengthen Nero's claim to the throne.
So personal ambition intertwined with military strategy. It's almost like a Roman soap opera, but with real-world consequences.
Precisely. And as we'll see, Agrippina's machinations, they didn't end with Claudius's invasion of Britain. Her thirst for power, it would ultimately have tragic consequences for both her and her son.
This is getting juicy. Listeners, you'll have to tune into the final part of our deep dive to hear how Agrippina's story unfolds and to wrap up our exploration of these fascinating Roman emperors and their impact on the course of European history. Welcome back to our deep dive into the reigns of Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius. We've been kind of exploring how these emperors, their conflicts, and their decisions really shaped the Roman legions and really left their mark on the battlefields of Europe. And we ended, last time on a little bit of a cliffhanger, talking about Agrippina the Younger and her ambitions for her son, Nero.
Yeah, Agrippina, she was a master manipulator, She really understood that true power in Rome, it wasn't just about sitting on the throne, it was about controlling the person on the throne.
Right. And she had already orchestrated Nero's adoption by Claudius. That secured his place in the line of succession.
Yeah.
But Claudius, he had a son of his own, right? Britannicus?
Yeah, he did. And Britannicus, by all accounts, he was a promising young man. But Agrippina, she was determined to see Nero on the throne. So she systematically marginalized Britannicus and just, really used her influence over Claudius to promote Nero's interests.
So she's maneuvering within the court, securing alliances, positioning Nero for greatness. So where does the military fit into all of this?
Well, you have to remember, the legions, they held immense power in Rome. And Agrippina understood that to solidify Nero's position, he needed the support of the army. And so the successful invasion of Britain, which, some believe she actually encouraged, it was a key part of her strategy.
It's all starting to connect now. So triumphant return from Britain, a boost to Claudius's popularity, and by extension, Nero basking in that, reflected glory. It's almost Shakespearean, this whole web of ambition and all these power plays.
Yeah. And just like a Shakespearean tragedy, this one doesn't end well either. Claudius, he dies suddenly in 54 AD. Under very mysterious circumstances.
I think we all know where this is going. Poisoned mushrooms. A strategically placed hairpin.
Yeah, the exact method, it's still debated, but a lot of historians, they believe Agrippina was involved. And with Claudius out of the way, Nero, still in his teens, he became emperor.
So mission accomplished, right? Agrippina, she gets her son on the throne. She must have been thrilled.
At first. Yeah, perhaps. But Agrippina's ambition, it didn't stop there. She actually tried to rule through Nero, essentially becoming the power behind the throne.
I bet that didn't sit too well with a young emperor who was so eager to, like, assert his own authority. I mean, teenagers, even in ancient Rome, they probably weren't too keen on taking orders from their mothers, right?
Exactly. The relationship between Nero and Agrippina, it soured pretty quickly. Nero, encouraged by his advisors, I mean, he saw Agrippina as a threat, as an obstacle to his absolute rule.
And this is where the story really takes a dark turn. So what did Nero do?
Well, in 59 AD, Nero, he was tired of his mother's meddling, and he was also, I think, fearing a potential challenge to his power, so he had Agrippina assassinated.
Wow, that's cold. I mean, from manipulating emperors to securing her son's place on the throne, only to be betrayed by him in the end. Agrippina's story, it's really a cautionary tale of ambition gone too far.
It's also a reminder, though, of the, precarious nature of power in Rome. I mean, even those who seemed completely untouchable, like Agrippina, they could still fall victim to the whims of an emperor,
Yeah.
especially one as ruthless as Nero.
So we've covered a lot of ground here in this deep dive. We've gone from Tiberius's, fiscal restraint and its impact on the legions to Caligula's bizarre, seashell victory. And finally to Claudius's conquest of Britain, which was, orchestrated in part by the, well, very ambitious Agrippina. So what's the overarching takeaway here? What does it all mean?
I think it really just highlights how the personal lives and the political ambitions of Roman emperors were completely intertwined with the military might of the empire. I mean, these weren't just figures in history books, right? They were real people making real decisions that ultimately shaped the course of nations, and often with, lasting consequences.
Yeah, for sure. It's also a testament to the enduring power of that Roman military machine. I mean, despite the eccentricities of some emperors, the legions continued to expand the empire, forging a legacy that we still grapple with today.
And for you military history buffs out there, I think it's a reminder that battles and campaigns, they're never just about tactics and maneuvers. They're really driven by, human ambition, political intrigue, and sometimes, the very personal desires of those in power.
Oh. Absolutely. So we've explored how the reigns of Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius, they shaped the Roman legions and, left their mark on the map of Europe. But their stories also, they offer really valuable insights, I think, into the nature of power, ambition, and really just the human condition. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.